Wow, an honor to be here, guys. How's everybody doing?
Not too
I'm
bad,
good.
man.
I'm good.
Not too
Thank
bad.
you.
Thuso on Instagram cracking jokes about me, but otherwise I'm doing pretty good. I
I
saw
was being
that.
nice, Barry. I was
I
being
saw
nice.
that. I saw that.
It's such an honor to be here with you two for several reasons. Obviously, I think Barry knows this. I've been a fan of his since Medicine for Melancholy. Actually, we watched it a couple months ago and texted him to tell him it still holds up, baby, still holds up, to let him know. And Thuso, to have the opportunity to be introduced to you, and your gift and your ability to bring to life such a harrowing character, destined for I think the annals of really of film history. People are going to talk about this for a long, long time. And then finally, to be here ultimately at the impetus, the work of Colson Whitehead, who is America's, as far as I'm concerned, preeminent living novelist at this point. Just absolutely incredible. The awards are what the awards are, but both Barry and myself are, how do I put this? Addicts, extreme fans of the Intuitionists. We've had times, to talk about that book, and there are probably 3 books that I would have to name for my own presence in fiction right now, and Intuitionist would absolutely be one of them. And so for all of those worlds to come together at this moment is such a pleasure. I want to ask you guys, because I watched all 10 episodes, and I have to say it was I didn't want to have this conversation not having done that. And I hope you take this in the best way possibly can. It was an ordeal. It was very much an ordeal, and you are very much there with Cora as the viewer. And so knowing that it was an ordeal as a viewer, and I think that was kind of the intention, honestly, I want to know how you guys are. Because I'm not okay. Obviously, I just came up off of it, but you guys had to live with it. You understand what I'm saying? In a different way, and I could tell like you weren't taking any shorts. So I just want to know how you guys are emotionally, honestly.
I'm good. I mean, I was joking about Thuso cracking jokes about me on the Instagram, but she posted all these behind the scene moments from the shoot, and it was nice to see us, in those in between moments, between doing the work and then taking a moment to reacquaint ourselves with who we are as people, in the midst of making the work. So I think I'm good, man. I mean, there were moments in the midst of creating it, and then there were moments in the midst of putting it together in the editing when, I keep talking about this quote from Hilton Alves' review of Moonlight, where he said, I'm going to use the pejorative, when Little asked Juan, what's a faggot? He said, Juan unpacks the word, but he doesn't unpack the boy with it. And I feel like in this, we were unpacking all these moments, these acts of brutality, but very diligent to not unpack the crew with it, not unpack the cast with it, and also hopefully not unpack the audience with it. And I think taking that care moment to moment, beat to beat, I don't know, it kind of helped me. So I'm doing all right, man. Well, what about you, Miss Mbedu?
I'm good. I'm also, in a good place. Even when we're shooting it, yes, it got heavy, it got hard, but I always felt safe. So like umbrella wise, I always felt good. I always felt, protected. And after wrapping the shoot, I did go see a therapist just to debrief from the character. But then having watched it again, it's a beautiful and very important and powerful story that I'm really, really excited for people to see. So yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, because there are so many, I actually think, more than, other diasporic cultures or communities on the continent, there are some real similarities between the South African experience and the African American experience. And, it was interesting to me. I wondered where you went to access, that place to get to Cora. For some of us, it's just a matter of, thinking about our, great-great-grandparents or whatever, or going to talk to people, or that sort of thing. And I really want to be clear about, how I'm asking this question and what I'm asking. I wonder what you went to get there, to get to that experience.
The thing with Cora is that for me, upon reading reading about her in the book, or reading her story in the book, she felt like, the everyday man. So accessing her wasn't as far as one would think she is, our journeys in terms of just our foundations, how we grew up, how we take on the world, are very similar, because the foundation is of like this great loss being in the form of a mother, and then these feelings of abandonment. So I could really empathize with Cora at every step of her journey, because it's something that's a lived experience for me. I don't think I naturally just don't allow myself to go, okay, because I've suffered A, B, and C, I can directly take it and put it into performance. My brain doesn't allow me to do that, because my brain says that was too traumatic. We're not gonna force ourselves to go through that again. If you do, I will shut down. So it really was a case of doing an extensive amount of research for myself to form Cora's story, develop her life experiences, which then form her psychology. So that was about building her environment, understanding her circumstances, which for me, again, is, yes, the story is set in the 1800s, but as we watch and we experience it, we realize that there's so many parallels to today, which means that a lot didn't change in the course of history. So I had to educate myself not only in the 1800s, but life in between the 1800s and 2020 and 2019 when we started shooting.
All right, this is, I think one of your signatures is the beauty with which and I've said this to you several times, depict Black people, depict the Black world. You are now journeying into a much uglier time. And I use the word beauty very specifically. I don't mean pretty. Like I don't mean glamorous. I don't mean like nice clothes. But I mean even within the tragedy. You take a film like Moonlight. Certainly, there's a contrast between the story and the depiction. A beautiful one. But this was a much bigger contrast because you're going into not just the dark art or the darkest, chapters of African American history, but really, darkest histories, some of the darkest chapters of the West itself. And I wondered how you balanced the beauty, which is there. I mean, I don't know anybody that shoots like Barry Jenkins, man. It's there, but with the darkness, of what you're depicting.
Yeah, it was interesting, man. We filmed the show entirely in the state of Georgia. And Georgia, was one of the bedrocks of the institution of American slavery. So we were physically in all these spaces where the fact of what happened was very real, and yet it was extravagantly beautiful. We filmed the majority of the show in winter, which means there wasn't a lot of daylight. And so we did what we call French hours. We would get to work, we would work maybe like 8 or 9 hours with no lunch. People would take these standing lunches. And we had a choice. We could have taken steps to try to either augment or eradicate the natural beauty that was all around us. And yet that same beauty that was present in our filming was present at the happenings of all these atrocities. And so, for example, the sequence with Big Anthony, which if the viewer saw episodes 1 and 2, you saw some of the heavier episodes in the entire show, that took place on an actual plantation. And I have no doubt that there were actual atrocities similar to this that were visited upon our ancestors in these spaces. There was this massive tree with Spanish moss on it. It's 4 PM, the sun is setting. It is gorgeous, but it's naturally so. And James and I made the decision that it wasn't our responsibility to remove that natural beauty in the service of some sort of level of verisimilitude or gravitas that we associate with these darker images. To me, it made it even more heinous that in the presence of such natural beauty and the beauty of our ancestors, these people still they still allowed themselves, they still caved to the most depraved instincts of their kind. And so, yeah, we sort of embraced the beauty and the horror. And where the balancing came, it was the same thing in this Hilton Als quote, you know, to unpack the image, but not unpack the audience with it, to not let the harder images be devoured by the beauty and vice versa, the beauty to be devoured by the harder images. And what it required, bruh, was almost like this double consciousness. I had to direct two versions of every scene. There was the scene I was directing in front of me, and then it's a very seductive medium. There was the scene I could direct. There was the line I could cross. There was the beauty that maybe was so seductive that it overwhelmed what we were actually doing. So I always had to have those things in mind. But the beauty itself, it was something that we realized we were not going to lean away from. As opposed to that, we were going to let it be a metaphor to underscore just how horrific these things were.
Yeah, I just want to stay on that for a second,
Mm-hmm.
because I want to talk a little bit about the history or historiography of what enslavement has been in American cinema. I would submit it's more significant than people actually realize. I'm sure, I'm not telling you guys anything. Birth of a Nation, being considered a revolutionary technical film, rooted in enslavement. Gone with the Wind. I believe certainly the book is the best-selling book in English outside of the Bible. The film is, just held, up here in terms of history. There are any number of Civil War, epics or, films dealing with enslavement, and those too are often very beautiful. But there's a different kind of beauty, and I noticed one thing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't recall many shots of, say, the big house.
No, there's one establisher when Ridgway pulls up. Right. The sequence of Dick Anthony takes place outside it, and then there's the scene where Ridgway and Cora meet for the first time. It takes place inside of it. We were much more focused on the quarter, which of course, when we went location scouting, we found tons of plantation houses, but the quarter, of course, had either been removed intentionally or had allowed to waste away. So we rebuilt that in the place where it once existed.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting choice. I mean, there's a whole industry of plantation tours in this country, which is,
Yes, there is, my friend. I found out very quickly.
Yeah, you saw it. I mean, people get married at these places. I mean, they do, a whole thing. And I don't want to, condescend here. Maybe you guys went to the Whitney in New Orleans. Outside of New Orleans? Okay.
No, we do not.
They're trying to do a different kind of plantation tour. And I thought of it with the film because whereas most tours begin with a house and the glories of the house, they actually start in the field. And they start with all of the atrocities and it ends in the house. So I thought about that in terms of decentering, who was that?
I mean, it's not intentional for that reason, but I guess we flow the same way. You don't see the house until halfway through the pilot episode. You're much more rooted in the quarter. I did want to say one thing. You mentioned Birth of a Nation, which is set during the Reconstruction era. And it's a film I was made to watch in film school. And I'll never forget the scene of the Black senators in Congress, eating fried chicken and laughing and shit on the floor of Congress. And it always really, it pissed me off. So I'm making this show, and in South Carolina, the second episode you saw, because Colson has taken this history and sort of decentered it a bit, where now there's a skyscraper in South Carolina. Skyscrapers were right on the edge of the tail end of Reconstruction. So I thought, oh, how am I going to address these Black men in this episode? Oh, skyscraper Reconstruction, all the Black men you see in the second episode, they're dressed in the style of dress that first group of senators were dressed during Reconstruction. That was my way of just trying to reclaim their image from B.W. Griffith, just a little bit. It's not something we have to make a point of, but making the show, there were all those little things where I was like, you know what? I was gonna curse, but yeah, so to hell with that shit. We on this shit.
So, Barry mentioned, Ridgway, which is, played, pretty impressively by Joel Edgerton. And I have to confess to you, acting is a bit opaque to me. So I am wondering how in those scenes, Thuso, you guys are going, and much of the 10 episodes is about, you guys, going there. Like how you how Barry says cut, and you walk away and like you're not like about to stab this motherfucker. Excuse my language. But like having to like turn it on, like I'm interested in that process, like how you know what I mean. Well, let me put it like this: how you manage to not lose yourself within the character itself, because there's such intensity in here.
I think
I'm really angry.
I think it's, you know, the cast, just the people that we worked with. Joel himself is a very kind man. He, from the very beginning, made me very aware that I could come to him for support in any scale, whether it be on set, off set. And so there was a dynamic, you know, that we had as people before, you know, being actors on a set. So in between, you know, the action and the cut, we were fully in the world that we're inhabiting. But after cut, we were ourselves. It was Joel, it was Thuso, because I think I speak for myself, and I think partly for Joel, it was hard to carry the characters outside of the world that they were in. It would have been too hard to push that agenda beyond the cut, you know. So yeah, it was, I never saw Joel as more than who he is outside of the story.
To be honest, that was a problem for me, you know. I think because he brought himself such a guilt, a shame, even though he's Australian, you know. It's sort of his lineage, you know, in a certain way, but not in another way. But I remember if you've seen the whole thing in that first Tennessee episode, when they come out the water on the shore, we did the first take of that, and you know, it was a pretty big set, and I was away from Thuso and Joel, and I just started yelling at him because I was like, no, this is not Joel and Thuso. This has to be Ridgway and Cora. And I started grabbing shit, and I was throwing it, like demonstrating. I was like, I'm so sorry, but this is them, and you can't protect that character. You gotta go. Yeah. You gotta go. She can handle it. We can all handle it. The therapist is here. But man, if we don't go, then we are lying about what this was. Yeah. Because I know I'm gonna have this episode when you and your old man says something to you, and I'm not here to redeem you. I'm not here to empathize with you. So when it's time to go, you gotta go do it. And it was like, I could tell he had that line where he was like, I can't do this to Thuso. Yeah. It's like, but Ridgway is doing it to Cora. You know? Yeah. And so it was one of those things where I think in building a world where everybody understood this thing was not bigger than any one of us. It wasn't more important than any one of us. That kind of in a way maybe made it a little bit harder at certain moments for people to go, okay, cool, I have to go do this thing, you know? So it's good to hear you say that. I mean, shit, I'm gonna rat her out. I was pissed because on the weekends, her and Joel and Chase would be out bowling and at karaoke. And I'm like, no. What y'all doing? What y'all doing?
Barry wanted it more intense.
I mean, not more intense, but there was, you know, you mentioned it earlier, man, that balance between the beauty and the horror, between the hard and the soft images, you know. I mean, so much of this shit, man, you live here, man, Make America Great Again, nonstop for 4 years, for 5 years. You know, there is a willful ignorance, a willful bliss, this complete failure to acknowledge. And I did feel like there were certain moments in these images that had to be very forthright and true. And it was a balance of letting these guys know when that was what I was pushing for. Yeah. But again, not wanting to devour them in the pursuit of it.
I want to go off script just a little bit.
Yeah.
And this is related. So, you know, Underground Railroad exists within a context, and the context is, you know, I would argue, while we are certainly at a very, very challenging moment in terms of political power for people of color, not just Black people, but for people of color in this country. Where the culture is moving is actually quite impressive. And I think in the culture, folks are beginning to confront really, really ugly things that they didn't want to confront. So I'm very interested in a very different country in the sense that it's a majority Black country. Apartheid was in that sense a very different system. I don't know the history, but I have to imagine that there was some amount of lying about the history and the culture to make the ruling class during apartheid noble. I wonder if partial with the political power, whether there was actually, or whether there is, in this moment, a retelling in the arts, South Africa's story in a way that rings more true to the majority population now. This is just for my edification.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think I can say that we are not where America is yet in terms of storytelling. We still have people who try to pitch stories that would tell our actual experience being shut down. We still have a lot of gatekeepers who are controlling the narrative that is there because they need the majority to be thinking a particular way. Because if we were to be shaken and understand what it is that happened, what truly happened, and what is still happening, it would mean, it wouldn't be good news for the powers that be currently. So no, we're not there yet. But I guess it's also that thing of our democracy is only 27 years old. So, we still have a fight ahead of us. But yeah.
Well, our democracy isn't much older, frankly. That's the very reason why Barry is making, at this point, at this very hour, something like Railroad. I want to, I kind of saved this for the back end because I think it's an important conversation, but I also think you're going to get a lot of questions about it, Barry. So I don't want to dwell too much on it. And, I've seen you talk about this. I am interested in the economy of violence. And what I mean, it comes as no surprise to anybody that's read the book, and certainly to the three of us who've seen the whole thing. That I think it's fair to say there's quite a bit of violence, in this epic. And my question is how you tread the line between wanting to be a truth teller, which is absolutely necessary, and not participate in the sweeping under the rug. And at the same time, balance that with the very danger of reproducing a kind of disposability of Black bodies. And I just want to push in a little bit more if I can. This is going to be a lot.
Yeah.
But were you ever worried that at some point the viewer might actually become dead into the violence?
No, I wasn't. Well, I wasn't. I knew the violence would be front loaded. The book is front loaded with violence. I think the show is front loaded with violence, and I'll illuminate that a bit. For me, what it was about was how is the violence, two things. How is the violence functioning as a catalyst for the character? And then within that, once I have those points, the violence I feel I need to show, because those things are a catalyst for the character, and both of those instances take place in the first episode, then to what degree do I need to show them so that it's clear it is registered with the character and motivated a change or some kind of action as a response? So in the first sequence, the first 10 minutes, Cora, again, I think the whole journey for her is sort of understanding or coming to know this process of parental sacrifice, or even just what the demands of being a parent are. She can't have this information about her mother that the audience has, but she can kind of live it. And so right away, she makes the choice to protect this child. So much of this for me is about the children. She throws herself on top of this child. Okay, have to have that. The actual physical acute violence in that is sort of alluded to. We cut away, we use the camera to hide that. And then I know, okay, there's a repercussion for this. I have this character who is hopeless, so I have to show this one instance of whipping. And now I'm like, visually as a director, how can I present this very forthrightly, but again, now not devour the audience with it? So we'll set it at night and we'll film it in an extreme wide. And I'm gonna start off, even on the night of filming, with just the wide. And what I realized was right away, that's all I need, bro. That's all I need. And then I thought, what can I excavate even within this? Because if I'm gonna show this, there's gotta be something else about it. It's like, oh, we come off the acute trauma, and now we show how acute trauma aggrieved upon one metastasizes and becomes a communal trauma, because we land on the witnesses. And I thought, that's as much as I can do, knowing I have to wrestle with this thing. And then I move on. This sequence with Big Anthony, which is the most violent thing, hopefully I'll ever have to film, over the course of my career. These things happened, for one, in my research. I wanted to make sure that these things happened, and they did. And I have this character who is pretty much given up hope. It takes an extreme act for her to realize this is too far. This barbarity is too far. And so I decided, okay, and this I have to show. And then in showing it, I had to once again have this conversation. If I'm showing this, what am I saying about it or saying through it that either hasn't been said or that needs to be said? Typically, when you see these moments of acute trauma, the person being aggrieved is either yelling out in pain or they're begging for forgiveness. In this case, I said, that's not going to happen. You know, instead, Big Anthony speaks to the fellow enslaved forced to watch. He tells them, no more masters, no more slaves. And then he turns to the brutalizer and says, God damn you, God damns you. It gives him agency and defiance. Once I knew I had to have those two moments, my job I felt like was, what else can I unearth in these moments? Will I lose the audience? I'm not sure. You know, there's all these people watching this thing, you know, they've seen it. I don't know if they got to the second episode. However, this is not a fact-based adaptation of history. You know, it's historical fiction, and yet it is rooted in the truth of something. And I felt like at the beginning, in order to earn this fantasy of the railroad being actualized and all these things, I had to speak truth to what our ancestors were forced to endure. Going on from there, the other times that there's an instance of violence, whether it's in North Carolina, when the young woman is unfortunately stabbed for sport, we cut away. The same thing in Tennessee, when he's describing the way Cora's friends were degraded. We don't cut to it. We play that entire scene on Cora's face, again, showing how this acute trauma, which I feel like we have taken from this demeaning spectacle for the audience by seeing it, we show the effect of hearing it on Cora. So it was always trying to find these moments and finding ways, okay, this thing is true for the story. It's a truthful event for the story. This is how this man is trying to exercise power over my main character. I'm not going to let him exercise that power over the audience. I'm not going to exercise that power over the audience. Yeah. And as I went through the story, I just kept trying to find, without getting out of my way, without getting in my way as an artist, I kept trying to find organic ways, organic means of doing just that. But in that first episode, there's no telling. It's all showing.
Yeah. Thuso, did you get all of the scripts together?
Not at the same time.
Yeah, yes and no. Yes and no. some of them joints I was writing like in the flow, and some of them, because of things they were doing, I was rewriting. You know,
as we're going. Yeah.
One of the most beautiful things that happened, Ta-Nehisi, was this guy walked into my office, somebody from the art department, and he held up this little thing because, you know, Cora has a plot. It was very important. What's the vegetation in that plot? And he said, yo, you know what this is? I go, no. He goes, this is an okra pod. I go, oh, it doesn't look like okra to me. He goes, yeah, I know. We've been in drought for 6 months. Don't worry. When we get to shoot, we'll have fresh okra in there. He goes, but I wanted to show you something. And he wrings it out. And all these seeds just dropped on my desk. And he picks it up. And I go, man, that looks dead. He goes, yeah. However, no matter how dry it gets, if you plant this and water it, it will grow. And then he just walked out. And I thought, bruh, okay, cool. I know what I'm doing with that. And I went in, and then, so some of the scripts had to come in late because I had to have time for things like that to work their way into my heart and then work their way into the scripts.
What was the challenge? I want to come back to this violence thing, but what was the challenge of, I mean, you didn't have to adapt and direct, you know, people do different things, right? And I'm not saying you shouldn't, don't get me wrong, Barry. I'm saying it's more work, you know what I mean? Like,
it's more work, but I didn't want anybody else to have to answer the question you just asked me before. I didn't want anybody else to have to answer it. Nobody else. That's on me. I didn't want anybody else to have to speak for it. Nobody else to have to answer for it. I didn't want anybody to have to make the choices of what to do with it. I felt like that had to all be on me. The benefit of that was there was so much stuff happening in the story, happening in the flow of the making. You've seen the show. That character standing on the turntable at the end of that episode, that only happened because we were there. In 2 days, my man was leaving the shoot. And I was like, something is happening between him and her. I've got to reconcile. I got to do something with this. And so I wrote it, boom, 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 boom. And then I directed it, boom, 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 boom. And then I had 3 months before I had to pay it off because we didn't shoot all that stuff underground until later. But I knew I had to get that moment And I think I couldn't put that responsibility on anybody else. And so, yeah, that's why I took it all on myself, bruh. Not the wisest thing for my mental and physical health.
That is actually where I want to go. I really would love, this is not my show, but I know, like, it's similar to acting in a sense. Like, if you're gonna go somewhere, you go there.
Exactly, you go
You know,
there, and you go all the way.
You're there, and so I'm like, you're going there twice, in two different kinds of ways. And so I'm just, I'm interested in the changes you went through to do that, and what that was like.
I can't say, man. I was so deep in it, I was deep in it, and I just felt the responsibility. This kid, Calvin, came in to play the character Jasper. And it's interesting because I'm talking about these 3 episodes in the middle. Why are there 3 episodes about the slave catcher in the middle of the show? That first Ta-Nehisi episode is not about him. That shit's about Jasper. Because this kid came in and I just saw something with that character that I thought was there. But then as this young man performed him, I realized this is so there. And there is something he is teaching her. And in order for her to get to Indiana, she has to go through this experience with him. They have taken this narrative from him, the other him. They've taken it from this cat. And it had to be me to make those choices. So you know what now? We're just gonna linger on this dude. We're gonna come all the way over through the wagon and we're gonna boom, boom, we're gonna float around, all those different things. That episode was meant to be 1 episode, Ta-Nehisi. Ta-Nehisi was meant to be 1 episode. But this guy came and I was like, you know what? It's his. I gotta give him space. He has something to teach. He has something to show. I haven't seen this from a character like this, someone who's physically in bondage and has decided mentally they are just completely beyond it, just completely beyond it. Whether you think it's a sane choice he makes or a choice fueled by insanity, that's the behest of the viewer. But I think for the character next to him, it is such a wonderful, powerful example, even to the point that his last breath is her first breath. It's kind of how I framed it. I ain't gonna sit here and explain my own shit, but that's kind of how I framed it. And I think it took me, I had to be in control to make those choices, like in the moment, in the flow,
So Barry's in control, and that's all very nice. I was reading today when he was talking about how, I think I didn't get to listen yet, Barry, but I saw you on Terry Gross. I can't wait to hear that because I'm doing my best imitation here. But she's such a legendary interviewer. And Barry was talking about, how much he's like a football coach and how it's modeled on, his time actually playing football. And, he's described this method of having written it, adaptations being made, et cetera. I guess what I'm interested in is how much of, and stipulating that you've read the book, but how people adapt, 2 different things. I'm interested in how much you knew going in and how it was to, it's one thing with the dude over here who's actually having the story evolve in his head and then, saying, okay, this is what we're gonna do, but you're on the other side of that. And I just wondered how that was for something like this. I recognize it's probably always kind of like this. I'm not saying, Barry, that, you somehow are different in that sense, but I'm interested in, for something like this, I'm interested in how that was.
Okay, so I only found out that it was based on a book after my 2nd audition, after the callback. And I'd met Barry and he'd asked me if I'd read the book, and I didn't know that it was based on a book. So after meeting Barry, I think there was 2 weeks between meeting him and going for the test shoot. And in that time, I read the book like twice because I understood how big and important the story was. And I really wanted to fully grasp who Cora was in order to bring her to the table in that test shoot. And Barry and I worked through those 4 scenes over and over and over again. I got a glimpse of how Barry works on set. He told me that, he doesn't direct the first take. He lets you make an offer and then he builds from there. And then I arrived in Savannah in June 2019. We started shooting in August. And so I had all of that preparation time to kind of just pour over the book. I think I read the book another maybe 5 times to fully understand Cora, but also having then read the scripts, there were moments that weren't necessarily in the script that I felt I wanted to take from the book to layer the character in conjunction with, you know, doing the other research and the preparation, listening and reading the stories of former enslaved people. So yeah, it was that.
But I want to piggyback Ta-Nehisi's question because and Thuso, you can be honest, because there were some things that I asked for, not on the day, but last minute. For example, in Tennessee, that moment with you and Jasper in the camp with the food, that wasn't planned, Ta-Nehisi. I wrote that maybe 2 days before. And you could have said, we're not doing that.
You always doing that, Barry. Always.
Yeah, I mean,
Always.
you could have said we're not doing that, but I think that's where the question's coming from, because there were times where I felt like maybe I didn't have the heart to go to the really demanding place or to get close to the line, as close as I felt I needed to. And that was a moment where I was like, no, we're skating through this episode. You know, I haven't seen the worst of this character. I'm talking about with the food, with the food with you, and then Jasper with the coat in the first Tennessee episode.
Mm-hmm.
You don't remember, girl? I gave
Wait,
you that,
Barry,
like,
like a lot happened with the food where he refuses to eat and then she doesn't eat, or which part?
where Joel forces you to eat.
Yeah.
I gave you that like 2 days before. I think Ta-Nehisi's trying to ask, how did you deal with that? Because that's a lot to ask someone.
Yes, I guess that's what I'm saying. Like, Barry's a much better interviewer than I am.
That's the thing. It's you know, it's like 100% believing in the circumstance of the character. There's no place for Thuso to say, oh, that's too much, or I can't go there. Because again, Barry, you having adapted it, I fully trusted what, you know, you came up with, even as we went along, even on scenes, like even with the Aaron scene in episode 8, scenes that I felt really frightened me because they spoke to parts of me that I wasn't ready to interact with or whatever. I fully trusted you and your vision, but also you created a space that if I didn't agree with you, I could come to you and say that doesn't make sense, but not because I was, you know, I was scared to go there emotionally, physically, mentally, but because I could go and say, this and this and this happened to Cora. So if you're asking of this, her character wouldn't necessarily be this type of person, you know? So I felt like I could have that dialogue with you. For me, yeah, I felt like there was nothing I couldn't do because of the amount of time it took to prepare and establish this character.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You said a word, Thuso. I almost called you Cora just now.
Hey, that's a good thing.
You said a word just now, and the word was fear. In terms of, you know, scenes, I would like to ask both of you, what scene scared you the most?
I'll go first, Thuso, because it's really easy for me. The big Anthony scene, man. The big Anthony scene. I didn't want to do it. But the fact that I didn't want to do it made me feel like I had to do it, because I imagine there have been so many times where in the telling of a story like this, there's been that one thing that we know is true, that we know shit worse happened, you know? And because we shy away from it, or we skirt it, or we shirk it, something's happened now where it's like, if I allow you to not acknowledge this thing, I participate in the erasure of it, you know? In the same way that when the first trailer for the show came out, I keep harping on these tweets, but it's like, oh, I don't want to see no more images of slaves. I want to see positive imagery. You know, we work in words. Linguistically, that means any image associated with my ancestors is inherently negative.
Yeah.
And then because of that, if I don't have images of my ancestors, I'm participating in this erasure. That was scared the shit out of me, man. It did, bro, but we had to do it. That's the only time I've ever walked off my own set. I walked off, man.
Wait, but Barry, did the scene scare you, or was it what you thought might be the reaction to the scene scare you?
Both, man, both. I didn't. It's interesting, man. Scouting for the show, walking around with all the background actors, it's one thing to intellectually know these things happened. It's one thing to read them on the page that they happen. It's another thing to be standing there, to stand there and look at a tree and know. And also the piece of property you're on, the people who own that property are direct blood descendants of the people who own that property. And and you absolutely know. That shit it's mentally, you talk, oh, was it too heavy? It was this kind of shit. It was this kind of shit, you know? It was also knowing I could make this piece of art, or I could cash in all my savings, buy this property and just destroy it. I could just destroy it. Which one is the more useful thing to do right now? You know, I chose the other one. And then I got to build the image. Now I have to be an artist and actually build the image. And it was tough, man. That is, you know, I even had times where I wondered if I should or should not have done it, you know? And I'm still not sure. I'm still not sure.
So what about for you?
I just thought of like 4 particular scenes, but it's all scenes rooted in like Cora being in the least amount of control. So the first 2 I grouped together. It's the scenes in the swamp, and then the scene where she walks into the river to take her life, because
spoiler. It's not in the book. It's not in the book. It's not in the book.
That's not it. Because, you know, it's like, as a person, as Thuso, then as the character, everything up until those points are things that she kind of has control over, because she can see it with her physical eye. In the swamp, she's trusting in Caesar, who has spoken of an underground railroad and a train, but she has no idea what that is. So it's like completely choosing death in the moment by leaving the plantation, but she has no clue what is before her. Also, we know what happens in the swamp. So it's allowing herself to be a part of this great danger that she has no control over. And then the other 2, it's in episode 1, the flashback of her being dragged away to be raped by a gang of men. And then what happens later on in episode 9 with Ridgway, just after, you know, the massacre scene, where he comes and he snatches her away. Those, for me, again, is something that, as a female body, my reality, and these are thoughts that hit me in the moment, that if something like this had to happen to me, I had no control whatsoever. And it's something that could potentially happen to me in real life. The reality is, these are big men who are physically stronger than me. And if they wanted to violate me in any way, it could potentially change, my life for the worst. And this is the reality of the character. So those are moments that always, would make one rather very anxious, because they are very close to home.
I should say, Todd, we had a therapist on set.
Yes.
At all times.
Yes.
We had a therapist on set at all times.
Yeah, and I Thuso, one of the things Thuso has repeatedly talked about is the feeling of safety. So,
yeah.
Yeah,
you got me thinking, man. You got me thinking, bro. I'm glad you watched it all, man. I'm glad you watched it all.
I have so many questions, but I don't want to spoil. I've got a ton of questions, but I won't.
And I'm a walking spoiler, so.
I want to highlight something, and I wonder how you guys think about this. This is coming out at a moment. When I was in a previous job, we would have these long lead times for our projects, and it was always a question of, will this be newsworthy? Will this be timely? And then we realized that we lived in or my editors realized that they lived in a white supremacist country. So it would always be timely. Something would always happen. And the timeliness is right now in the very state where you guys filmed. They are attempting to greatly reduce the power of the franchise, the power of the vote of African Americans. The bill was signed in front of a portrait of a plantation.
Wow.
And I just wonder what it is to have this released in a moment where it is so clearly alive. It's not abstract, clearly alive. And I just wonder what that means for both of you.
It's strange for me. I'm gonna go first, too. So it's strange for me because it's funny. I was thinking of the title of your book. We were 8 years in power. these things do have a long lead time. And I've debated whether or not, because there's been a few of these now over the last like 2-3 years. I've debated, is it because we all felt secure that it was time, that people were ready to go into this? Or did we know the other shoe was going to drop because they felt like 8 years was too damn long? I think it might be the latter. But as far as the timing right now, oof, hey, I would rather it be the worst timing and there was nothing related to the images in the show. But I think that the story of this nation, of this republic, unfortunately has been that stories like this have always been right on time, because so much of this shit has been allowed to persist. And so, yeah, it's yeah. What you got, Mr. Baker?
I think for me, and I remember because when we're shooting it, again, I'd have moments with William Jackson Harper on set where we would talk about his experiences, as a Black man. Because I'd shared with him that upon arriving in America, I'm very tomboyish in nature. I'm always in hoodies and comfortable clothes. I had to make the conscious decision not to walk around in a giant hoodie because I know that, it's not safe to be mistaken for a Black American man, and so we would have those type of conversations. And the reality is that it has always been time. It's just that now with technology and people recording things, there is a greater outcry, and so with the story dropping now, it's like giving voice to people who have been told, oh, you're imagining this, your pain, your trauma. It's something to get over, as slavery happened such a long time ago. Now with, life having happened and things being at our fingertips, when this is put out, it kind of validates that voice or affirms that voice that no, what you're feeling, what you're saying is actually very true. But now that people are aware of it, where to from here,
Well, I just I want to congratulate you both. As I said, I think this is going to ignite a discussion that.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and honestly, it's gonna go past the moment. It really is. I really believe that you guys are gonna be on to your next projects and your projects after that, and you will still hear about this. So that's what art is supposed to do. So congratulations to you both.
Appreciate it, man. By the way, for the people watching, I gotta show Ta-Nehisi some love. So way back in the day, he's right. He is a Medicine for Melancholy stand, the original Medicine for Melancholy stand. He came to San Francisco, and we had never met before. This is before he was the Ta-Nehisi coach. And he came to speak at University of San Francisco or San Francisco State or something. But Wyatt Cenac put us together. We got a drink in a bar, and it was Ta-Nehisi Coates who told me, Barry, what are you doing, man? You got to get out of the country. You got to go write something. And so I went to Brussels, Belgium, and I wrote Moonlight. And then I went to Berlin and I wrote A Beale Street Could Talk, man. So every time I get a chance to say it publicly, I'm gonna thank you for that, man. Because I could tell you meant it, and I could tell when you said it, it was because you cared about me. So I appreciate you, man.
I appreciate that, and the feeling is mutual, and Thuso, now the feeling is. I don't know if it's mutual. I won't go so far as to say anything I've written. I don't want to assume that, but I have great appreciation for your performance in this, and I look forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank y'all. Stay safe.